Hey, it's Tom Pankhurst for GAK, and we're going to be checking out some of the Catalinbread Epoch pedals. So we've decided to do 3 of their Epoch pedals as one video, specifically because they're all based on one thing, and that is the Echoplex 3, or the EP3. If you're not aware of what the EP3 is and why it's so legendary, essentially, the preamp stage has been ripped out of them before. People like Eric Johnson have been famous for using the preamp section of an EP3. The same with people like David Gilmour, and the names just keep going on. The preamp stage of these things is great, and that's why we have this, which is the Epoch Boost. This literally contains the preamp and the boost, but we'll get into that a little bit more in a moment. And then as far as the tape section goes, we have the Belle Epoch Tape Echo, which is a smaller version, and with one additional feature that this doesn't have, but it is a small version of the Belle Epoch Deluxe, which is a larger version with way more features than the small version. So what ties all these pedals together? Well, they're a faithful replication of the exact EP3 circuitry, which means they've gone down to the things like the 22-volt power rail, they've got the JFET preamp that was included on later spec EP3s. They've looked at the original circuitry and seen where things could potentially be a little bit better. They faithfully recreated it on the whole, and they fine-tuned it so that it's just that little bit more friendly and just that little bit more versatile and won't wear out as quickly. In terms of what's actually inside these pedals, they're all discrete through-hole construction. They're using orange drop 225p capacitors, they've got carbon composition resistors, germanium diodes, and other premium components, which really makes this one of the Echoplex sort of clones, essentially, that is really on par with the original. One thing that makes this obviously very different to an original EP3 is that they don't contain any tape. What that means, of course, is that you actually have a pedal that you could take on the road and wouldn't have to constantly be upkeeping, because tape wears out and it gets all horrible over time, which is something that people actually go for. So what's really interesting with these pedals is that they allow you to control a lot of those tape sort of effects and the way that tape responds over time, with a few of their parameter controls, which is really cool. But obviously no tape means that it's way easier to use. So the first pedal we're going to show you is the Epoch Boost, and this is a preamp and buffer. So in the original Echoplex, the preamp was essentially always on. You couldn't bypass it. It was just a part of the EP3. And for that reason, loads of people really liked using it, even with the delay section cut out. So people like Van Halen, David Gilmour, Eric Johnson have used them. Eric Johnson being famous for taking one actually on tour, but without the tape section within it. What you're getting out of the Epoch Boost is essentially that exact same style of preamp. However, there are a few small differences. So this is a faithful recreation of that Echoplex preamp. We've got the new old stock orange drop capacitors in there. Again, that 22-volt internal rail like the original unit. And it's a close approximation of the original TIS-58 JFET. In terms of what they've actually made different, they've biased it slightly gainier, so you're getting a larger amount of boost out of this, and particularly out of the preamp, so that you can drive it a little bit harder. So you actually have 20 decibels of boost available. And in addition to that, they've actually added a high impedance input, which means if you're running long cables or with other pedals potentially, or even as the only pedal, which is obviously where you would use a high impedance thing, that's going to be really useful. So if this is like the first thing on your board or the last, it's going to be fantastic for that. Catalinbread have also added a high impedance buffer at the beginning of this pedal on the input. So that means that you're going to have a little bit more clarity and headroom if you're using this, particularly if you're running long cables or you're using it as an only pedal. It's just going to add that just a little bit more, and you're going to be able to get just that little bit more versatility out of it, and that's why you would potentially choose something like this over any of the other style of Echoplex preamps that are on the market. So if we jump into what makes this pedal cool, the preamp section actually controls a blend between 2 signal paths. You have the preamp section and the mixer circuit, and that allows you to blend those two, obviously, to taste. On the left-hand side, you have the volume, and you have rudimentary frequency enhancement on the second half, which you can notice when I've cranked it. From 12 o'clock onwards, we then have some frequency band enhancements, so you're getting a different take on the EQ. It's going to change the way it responds a little bit. And that's something that's really cool and really versatile, particularly within this unit. In terms of the boost, it's pretty standard. It's a standard boost. The more you turn it, the more volume and gain you're getting out of it. And in particular, that gain with an Echoplex style preamp adds a little bit of sparkle. It adds just that extra bit of vibe. For me, I noticed that it kind of colored the mid-range quite nicely. And you can use this to obviously push your amp into overdrive. So the second pedal we're going to be looking at is the Belle Epoch Tape Echo. So this is a recreation of the Echoplex tape section, obviously, because it's tape echo. It's got some pretty standard controls on it. So for instance, you've got a mix control, which is going to control how loud the delay is in comparison to your dry signal. The echo delay here on the right is controlling the length of the delay, so the amount of time before it actually comes in. You can hear that when I'm tweaking it. The echo sustain on this unit is quite interesting because it essentially controls the level of feedback of tape echo that you have going on within the unit. So if you have a delay, it will send that delay back in, so it will be delayed again. But obviously because of the nature of tape, that second delay won't be as loud because it's not printed as loud. This means that you can make the pedal oscillate by itself beyond a certain point. You can hear there's elements of sustain being drawn out over a long period of time, but then once it goes past a certain point, it's going to start self-oscillating. It's going to start sort of feeding back on itself and creating this wild mess of noise, which is something the original Echoplex actually did, and that's something that's really cool to see on this unit. The mod knob here in the middle controls the level of wow and flutter. So tape echo typically has some wow and flutter in the way that it operates, and that's something you'll be able to hear when I turn the knob up. Essentially, all the way to the left is completely off, so you've got a nice pristine delay. At 9 to 10 o'clock, you've got that realistic warble that the original had, and then you can turn it into pure sort of nasty tape style wow and flutter, which is really cool if you're using that for some production techniques or things like that. So the last thing with this pedal, and the thing that makes it different to the Epoch Deluxe, is the recording level knob on the right here at the top. What that is actually doing is controlling the level. If you imagine on a tape, it would be going around and the sound is printed onto it, and then that goes around on the tape, and then that comes back, and that's how the delay works. What this is doing is giving you control over the level that is actually printed onto the tape. And that means that the tape, when it's read, inside the pedal, will give you a different characteristic. So you have control over the way that it is not only printed, but also gives you control over some of the ways in which the delay actually sounds, so the characteristic of those delay repeats. It's important to note with this thing that it only affects the initial printing of the sound, so it only takes the initial input. It won't affect the existing repeats, which is quite cool because it means that you can literally use this as a sort of character knob. So the last pedal we're looking at is the Belle Epoch Deluxe. Essentially, this features some of the features of the Tape Echo and expands on it with a bunch of different options. So on the left-hand side, we have the option to switch between 6 different modes, and those range from different styles of delay. And then we have the depth knob, and this actually controls a different parameter depending on which mode you have selected. I think we've previously covered what these other 4 knobs will do. You've got a record level, echo volume, echo sustain, and echo delay. All of those things are essentially on the Tape Echo Belle Epoch. So we're going to demonstrate the different modes and how they sound when you're adjusting that depth instead on this unit rather than the deep dive of the entire thing. So the first mode is an EP3 tape voicing, obviously based on that original Echoplex. Something to note with this one is that it has slightly bright repeats. You can hear that when I'm playing. It's going to be the main one that you probably use for that Echoplex 3 vibe and the way that an Echoplex warbles in the way that the tape emulates. So that's something really cool. Mode number 2 is an analog dark voicing based on classic Bucket Brigade delays. So the darker repeats in comparison to the first mode make it sit slightly underneath the signal, which can be used to thicken out parts you already have and make it sit within a mix really nicely. The depth knob on this actually controls the depth of chorus, which is really interesting because chorus is essentially like a form of delay when you think about it. You've got control over that with the depth, and you can definitely hear that as I go through it. The third mode is essentially a Rotary Speaker emulation. So you've got control over the Rotary Speaker with the depth control, and that's going to be controlling literally the depth of the Leslie speaker. Not much more to say about this one, it's a Leslie. Mode number 4 is a manual sweep. It's more like a resonant filter, so if you're thinking of effects like that, you would think maybe a wah. You can hear it when I'm playing. There's a certain element of EQ sections being pushed. The mod on this, or the depth, I should say, controls the amount of tape warble. So at noon, you've got like a classic amount of tape warble, and then you can obviously adjust that to taste. Mode number 5 is actually based on a Deluxe Memory Man, so you're also getting access to some of those things alongside an EP3. This particular one in Mode 5 controls a Deluxe Memory Man's chorus, so you can dial that in with the depth knob here, and that's literally just going to control the level and depth of the chorus. Mode number 6 is going to be controlling a Deluxe Memory Man again, but this time the vibrato section. Depth in this case is controlling the amount of vibrato that you have going on and the depth of it. So the last thing we need to mention with this pedal is this knob here, which changes the way that it functions. So you can use an expression pedal with this, which means you can control essentially the mod or the depth parameter depending on which mode you're on using an expression pedal. We've decided to demo this in some sort of weird ways, and you'll be able to tell that. But the possibilities with this sort of thing are endless. You could use this on live gigs, you could use this to dial in specific tape sort of flutters and things like that if you're doing some recording. It'd just be really useful, so keep an ear out for that. So that was the Epoch series from Catalinbread. These things are obviously built to be faithful recreations, and I think you can tell in the way that they respond. When I was playing through them, they felt like a tape machine sort of does. You know, they're not perfect all the time. They give a certain amount of that word vibe to your recording. You're going to be able to hear that. You're going to be able to give a little bit more life to some of your recorded parts and give a little bit more life to some of your production choices as well as a result of using tape stuff. So you could use these potentially as outboard gear or in the effects loop or any of those things. I think if you're in the market for an Echoplex based thing, be it the preamp or the tape section, you should definitely get your hands on one of these and try them out, because to be honest, these things felt really good to use. If you've enjoyed our video, please leave us a like, subscribe to see more things like this, and we'll see you in the future.